Welcome to the Subconscious Elements podcast, a podcast where we talk about all things spirituality, whether it's relationships, movies, myths, legends, stories, books. And today we're going to talk about the 15th gene key. I'm here with my co-host, Tori Setliff, and I'll let her kick it off.
So the 15th gene key is going to talk about the process from dullness to the gift of magnetism and ultimately the Siddhi of Florescence, which is basically the flowering of human consciousness into natural rhythms. All right, so at the shadow of dullness, we can see this represented in human lives by simply surviving rather than fully thriving. And in the shadow of dullness, you have boredom and just a lack of inspiration for life in general, which I can definitely say that I've experienced myself. And there's two different frequencies that this can show up as. It can show up as the repressive nature, which is emptiness and how just life can be unfulfilling. And one way that I've been able to understand this is through the movie Soul, and how the character goes through life day by day and it's just repetitive, and he always has this sense that he wants something more for his life, but he's always unable to achieve that something more. And then you have your reactive nature, which can be seen as the extremist. And this is a person who kind of runs away from his feelings and just hiding from the shadow, basically. And
one of the movies that reminded me of the dullness, how you explained soul, I think it was Elementals, was it? Or no, it was Inside Out 2 that was reminding me of it with Enway. And so many teenagers kind of experience this dullness where I don't know if they're experiencing it essentially, but they express it, right? Everything is just meh. Everything's kind of, oh, it's whatever. And it's funny because on the outside looking in, they have like the best lives. They sleep in, they don't have any responsibilities, they hang out with their friends, but to them, it's just another day. And I feel like all teenagers go through this. I feel like it's just a part of, when you're a teenager, you're essentially at this point where life still feels like each day lasts forever, but you're in the thick of like going to school, listening to your parents. You're like past like almost idolizing your parents. You're kind of past that. They're just like people you kind of have to deal with. And then you got school all day. And so everything is like at this point where everything is like boring, right? So I feel like that's kind of like a phase that we all go through. But I feel like it was definitely symbolized in that, what do you call it, the little emotion character? Ennui. Yeah, ennui. But I've also definitely experienced dullness. It's just like that thing of like where I would say it's almost being unappreciative of what you have. Right. And so because you don't feel like any spark when you do things, because you just feel like you're just doing them, but they're not particularly fun. You're just kind of like meh about it. And I do want to say that one of the things that helped me break through it was, plant medicines. I feel like they gave me a different perspective. I definitely felt like when I first got out of the Marine Corps, I was identified with my brain. Didn't have any perspective outside of that. And I definitely wasn't grateful for the little things. And once I started to delve into it, then I was like, I would realize like how awesome the little things are. Like just being able to enjoy a day off and watch TV in an air-conditioned house, whereas without those things, it's never enough because your mind always needs something else.
yeah, it was saying that two people can be living the exact same experience and have a completely different perception of what they're experiencing. One person can be in heaven and the other in hell with the same exact experience. And I've definitely seen this where I've just been watching people as they go out, and you can see on the outside they look like the perfect family. They have 3 beautiful children, and yet they still seem to find all of the wrong things in every situation. Instead of just being grateful for being out with your family, having a family, being able to treat them to a birthday dinner or whatever it may be. Yeah, so that's definitely a big thing. I was like, man, I wish I had brothers and sisters and went out on a nice fancy dinner, and then these people are like, oh, well, you forgot to do this, you forgot to do that, and this is wrong. And they just all like create hell for themselves because they're just not appreciating what they do have.
Right. I think that you see that a lot. It's like the classic story of like a wealthy nation or wealthy people. They essentially find everything wrong in the moment, whereas someone with a lot less is appreciative of anything that they have. And then, it was even in that one movie we were watching, Dungeons and Dragons, where the like well-to-do con man, he like complained about everything. He's like, this tea is way too hot. I need to tell them to fix that. And he's like, this doesn't look great. I need to tell them to fix that. It's like when you have all these things, your mind is always looking for a way to make things better. And I've definitely fallen into that where I have an amazing experience, and then my only goal is to get that same experience but make it better. And the act of doing that can actually ruin the experience, because you're like, oh, last time we didn't have this, so I want to make sure we have this. And then, no, don't forget, we got to have that. And then what you learn along the way is that you just got to go with it. Like, no matter how hard you plan, someone can mess it up, and you have to be able to move with whatever's happening. Like, we've taken so many different camping trips, and it's almost always like the unexpected ones that end up being amazing. But when we try to like plan everything out, it's like it rains the whole weekend or something silly like that. And you end up having like a different perspective from it. Like, I remember one time we went and it just like rained, and it wasn't as nice as, like, you definitely tell they used AI to explain the place, and it was like definitely not what was in the description. I feel like that's every Airbnb ever, but and it rained the whole time, and we were just like felt icky. But when we finally got back, man, that shower and meal was like so amazing. But yeah, it's like that typical storyline of, if you have more, you're more likely to cause your own suffering, because essentially your mind you feel like you'd be more happy with more things, but the perpetual state that the mind is in is to always find more. So you're actually never actually satiated the way you think you would be.
Yeah, so the 15th gene key, it's actually found in the codon ring of seeking. And so it forms the main stem of the codon ring of seeking, and there's multiple codons in this ring. But this will be the last to be experienced at the end of this enlightenment. And basically, this is when all seeking comes to rest, and you no longer feel the need to rise up or the need to be at peace. It's just the natural thing that happens and cannot be forced. And yeah, so what you're saying, expectation versus reality, and the acceptance of the reality, regardless of the way that it plays out, because inevitably it'll be different than what you're expecting. In one sense, it can be very relieving to think about. It's like, well, I can't do anything about it, and there's nothing to be done. And so that can give you a relief, but it can also give the mind stress, because your mind always wants to figure a situation out. And it was saying that this cannot be figured out by the mind. The mind cannot conceptualize a way to make things perfect, in a sense.
Yeah. I think in that same instance, I was talking about how enlightenment can't be rushed, has to take its own time. And that can be seen as both a curse and a blessing. So it's very similar to what you're saying. But that's kind of true with almost anything, right? Where it's all about your perspective. And I guess what another one of the main points of this gene key was talking about attitude. Like, that's the only thing that you can really change about the whole process is your attitude towards it and or doing it. Right? Same thing with the curse and the blessing. That applies to literally anything. It either holds you back or is the reason that you rise above. He was also talking about like being present, and even the dull moments is a part of the work. And that's what leads to magnetism. And I kind of wanted to compliment you. I really feel like you're really good at dealing with the dullness of life. Like you do really well with it. Like,
It's a struggle that I've kind of triumphed over because I for sure have struggled with it in the past, like doing all the small monotonous things that need to be done.
yeah, you're really good at that. But I feel like that's a part of like you definitely when it talks about magnetism, you definitely have that effect on you. And I feel like the reason that is because if you can be present in the dull moments, you'll way more present in the exciting moments. And there is a magnetism to someone who's present. Like we all see it. We all notice it. When someone is really present, you notice that something's different about that person, even if you're not aware it's their awareness that you're noticing. You'll feel attracted to that person. And I would definitely say that the opposite happens when someone isn't present, right? If you're talking to someone and they're checking their phone while you're speaking, it's like, it doesn't matter how good of a person they are. It's kind of, you're just like shut off to them. Like I've met some pretty cool people, but as soon as it's like a one-on-one conversation, they're like constantly DMing people and checking their phone. I'm just like, here, you know what I mean? It's just like hard to connect. It's like there's no connection anymore because their mind is somewhere else. And a lot of times, the only time they'll check back into the conversation is to say what they have to say. And so, yeah, building that essential skill of, I mean, I kind of talked about it, right? Building the skill of being present even in the dull moments. It's essential work to developing your own consciousness and awareness.
Yeah, it's saying like doing the dishes, doing the laundry, all the small things, sweeping the floor, mopping the floor. It's like trying to do all of these things in the best way that you know you can because they have to be done anyways, and it's for you and your family or whoever you're around. And so you want to set a high expectation for the reality that you have. And the higher expectations that you set, life will inevitably result in the same because, like we say, the magnetism will bring you more of what you are giving in. So it's like a give and a take. If you are doing things in a negative way and you're thinking bad thoughts when you're doing whatever you're doing, daily task driving, then life will inevitably bring that forward in your life as well. So there's like the two polarities, and it can be seen as like heaven or hell. And this is essentially a state of mind that we live in our lives every day. It's not a state that we go to after death. It's a state that we live in. And my grandmother, she would always say, life's a bitch and then you die. And so she would say that every single day. And it's like, well, of course your life's going to be a bitch and then she's just going to die, because that's like the motto that she lives by. But just changing what you say to yourself, what you say to others, the energy that you put out into the world will magnetize those greater things for you.
Yeah, I was just reading a book recently and it was just talking about attitude. It's like talking about changing realities for yourself and fate and destiny and desire. And it was saying that your attitude of the things, what attracts or repels things. And that if you feel whatever you feel about a certain thing or a certain event will only attract or repel said thing. So if you're constantly in a negative state or in a negative state of mind, then you're only going to attract more negativity. But if you're in a positive state of mind, you'll attract a positive outcomes.
Yeah, and then you meet the person that's you ask them, you're like, "Oh, how's your day?" And they're like, "Oh, just living life." And then it's like the same thing. It's like instead of thinking about all the good things, they're dwelling on all of the bad things. And by dwelling on the bad things, you create more bad things. And so you're just in a perpetual state of living life in a bad state. And so just by changing that mindset of like, you know what, life is pretty good. I live in America, I have a job, I'm eating great food, I'm making money. It's like, yeah, I might not have the best job in the world, but it is a job and it does support me and my family. And so just like changing the mindset of like, oh, I hate my job to like, oh, maybe I don't love my job, but I can appreciate it for what it is in this time of my life.
Yeah. Yeah, this book was talking about how you want to find the positives in every negative situation because it's like an exercise. And then when you do that, you get better and better at it, and it helps change your mind state. And one of the examples it was using was talking about like the place that you live. And, it's funny because I was totally relating to it because we're kind of in the same scenario where it's like, we're ready to move out of this place, but we're kind of stuck here for now because we literally signed on to a new lease, and then we get new neighbors that constantly smoke weed and stink up our entire apartment. And now that we're expecting a little one, now we're kind of outgrowing the whole situation. Like literally right before we were going to have this baby, we signed a whole nother lease. And then now we're like, dang it, we need more space. And so then like every day is kind of like this, almost like this irritation of just like, man, we got to get out of here. Man, we got to get out of here. But then this book was talking about it, and it was saying that, yeah, by doing that, you're kind of perpetuating the state that you're in, and to find the positive aspects of it. But at least, at least you have a place, and all the things that that place does provide you. It's like, if you can think about it like that, you'll be in a much more creative and positive state to help manifest whatever new place it is that you want. And one of the things that was really clicking for me was, you're constantly looking at the negative aspects. You're not going to be you're not going to be in a creative mind state. And if you're constantly looking for the positives, you're essentially, those repetitions add up over time. And so, another point that I wanted to get to was like, it's not necessarily that, I guess if you wanted to look at it like more, I guess in a scientific way or in a more realistic way, instead of like, oh, vibrations attract vibrations, that type of idea. If you're constantly looking at the negativity, even when you get something that you always wanted and dreamed for, your mind will naturally look for the negativity, right? So it's not even so much that you actually are attracting negative events, which I do believe, but even when you get things that you want, your mind won't be in the state to be appreciative of what it is that you wanted. You'll just immediately look for all the negative things. And I think we all know people like that, where like whatever it is that they want or whatever it is that they get, the first thing they go is like, oh, well, if only it was like this, or, oh, I really wanted it like this. And it's like, what, dude? That's the first thing you have to say about the gift. You know what I mean? Like, someone does something so amazing for you, and the first thing you say is, oh, if only it was like this. You were telling me a story the other day about someone getting these crazy flowers, and their first comment was about,
The
oh,
wrong color.
the wrong color. And it's like some insane amount of flowers and work that was put into getting them or something.
Yeah. Yeah, there's basically for a birthday, and like one of the people in their family is like a landscaping person, and this particular person is going to college, and so I don't know if the message was relayed or not, but I think he was just told, hey, bring some nice flowers for this party. And so he brings like beautiful pieces of weeping willow tree. It's like insane. It's like huge pieces of trees just for this one event. And her first complaint when she walked into the room, why aren't they purple or yellow? Those are the colors of my school. And it's like, what? Are you joking right now? And she was being 100% serious. She's like, no, this is not what I want. And it's like, it's insane. She lives in a mansion. She's having a crazy party with crazy catering and drinks, food, everything. And the first thing that she says, she finds something wrong with the situation. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely had an experience one time too, where my buddy had built like this, he built a fireplace on his own, like this amazing fireplace. And I remember this one chick that was there, she's like, oh, well, did you build a secret door so that your kids can hide in there if there's ever an intruder? And he's like,
the hell?
yeah. And she's like, oh, well, that would have been cool if you did. And I'm like, what if you say, it's like, this man built a fireplace with his bare hands, and you're gonna make a comment about, oh, well, did you build a secret trap door so your children can? It was like so awkward. He was just like, no, I didn't. And she's like, oh, it would have been cool if you did. And I just remember thinking like, this is oh man, it's like, just appreciate the man for what he did. I just want to be like, that's awesome, dude. And the number of people that will build their own fireplace, very small, like super legit skill. And this person was like, doesn't even say it's cool. It's just like, oh, what did you do this? Like there's always those people, or even it's almost like a one upper kind of thing, right? It's like that same kind of mentality where like no matter what someone does, it's like, oh, well, what about this? Or oh, what about that?
Yeah, that's
It,
the extremist nature. That's like the one that always needs to find something else. Or, yeah, it's like
yeah,
they don't appreciate.
yeah. That reminds me of a recent podcast I did with Mike, who's a good friend of ours. We're gonna have him on this podcast very soon. And he was just saying that people who have trauma, undealt with trauma, they always need noise. Like they always have to have something going on. I feel like that's very similar, right? Where, yeah, the extremist part is like where they can't handle like silence or like regular stuff. Then there has to be like, and I feel like we all kind of experience that, right? Where we gotta have a podcast on it, gotta be playing music, gotta be doing something. But if you've done the work and I would say like another way for saying I've done the work, but I guess, in tune, then you don't necessarily need to be doing something, right? Or need to have something in your ears or whatever. Like sometimes I try not to constantly listen to something. I try to take a second to just let let my mind run the thoughts. It's like we can get caught up in this pattern of drowning out our thoughts with something else.
Yeah, for sure. Tuning back in with yourself and allowing yourself to work through the problems in your mind can definitely save you a lot of anguish. And that you can definitely tell the difference between people who do that and give themselves the space and people who don't. And yeah, moving towards the gift of magnetism, I was just listening to a podcast yesterday, and it was a story of a man who he really wanted a house, and he wanted this house in this particular location because he traveled very often, and he wanted it close to the airport, and it was perfect. It was beautiful. It even had like Zen architect built into it, so you could tell that the people that built this place put a lot of effort into the quality and the aesthetics of the house. And they said that there were a bunch of bidders that were basically against him, and that he was like one of the last people to put in an application, and he was the youngest applicant, so he was just kind of worried that maybe they would discount him because he was so young and just think that maybe he just wants to use it for partying and etc. And he said the one thing that helped him was the gift of magnetism by not putting this house, this wish, this desire on a pedestal, but rather by aligning with it and seeing it as something that he already had, and something like in his mind he would say, oh, well, I live here. And he was just imagining himself living there, and like, this is where I would be doing my podcast. This is what I would be doing with the house. This is like, I would be appreciating it. He just like imagined himself living there, commute, everything. And he sent a thank you note to the people that allowed him to view the house. And like a week later, they accepted his application and he won the house. But it's just saying that oftentimes we put our desires above where we're at, and that is not in alignment with our energy and where we're at in life. And so inevitably, it'll always be just out of reach. And that by knowing that it's achievable and envisioning yourself like the power of imagination, that you can magnetize these things towards yourself.
Right. Yeah. Back to the dullness part, dealing with the dullness or with the dullness. One of the things it reminded me of was Jordan Peterson's talks, where one of the speeches he had, I mean, this is something that he consistently preaches, so that you can probably hear this in many different ones or many different podcasts, but he kind of breaks down that God is essentially the call of adventure, or that it could be perceived as that, like a symbolic version, right? Like if you didn't want to believe that God is actually coming to these people, or like some being is coming to these people, you can also perceive it as a call to adventure. And in order to accept the call to adventure, you have to first be responsible. Essentially, to take adventure in your life, you have to take more responsibility. Like that's what adventure is. And that really rings true because in anything, but I'll relate to martial arts, you can't train jujitsu unless you can pay the membership. You can't train jiu-jitsu unless you take care of your body. You can't be good at jiu-jitsu unless you have like literally all the things in your life lined up. Like people will want to not take care of themselves and then want to try to be good at jiu-jitsu. And it's like, dude, it ain't happening, dude. You how like I had this one guy come up to me and ask if he could train for free and that he'd be a competitor and he would dedicate his life to jiu-jitsu. And it would be different if he was like a young kid. But this was a full-grown man, 31 years old, trying to tell me that he'll dedicate his whole life to jiu-jitsu, but he also can't afford the membership. And it's like, you know, I'm a nice person, so I didn't want to just like break his heart and be like, yeah, dude, you don't stand a chance and ain't no way you can train here. But that's what I should have done. I feel like, you know, should have just straight up told him the truth. But it just goes to this idea that how could you possibly figure out something as complex as jiu-jitsu if you can't figure out your life? If you can't come up with $150 a month for the membership, how are you going to figure out jiu-jitsu? And then it's like, oh, and then that's not even incorporating all the other expenses that would be required to be good at jiu-jitsu. You'd have to compete regularly. Who's paying for that? You'd have to pay for private lessons. You'd have to visit other schools. You'd have to travel. And it's like, so you don't want to pay me, but you think you're going to find money for all those other things? And then it's like, again, if you're not able to take care of yourself outside of jiu-jitsu, how are you going to take care of yourself in jiu-jitsu? And it can be applied on like so many different levels, like whether it's, you know, people want to go train with the best team and then they don't even have good training habits at their current gym. You know, it's like, dude, if you go train with the best team, they're just going to murder you. Like you're just going to get hurt and then not be able to train. You have to be on top of your game. Like all your P's and Q's are in a row. All your I's are dotted, everything. And then maybe you'll have a shot to stick around with the best team in the world, you know, best teams in the world. And you can apply that to anything. It's like people want a girlfriend, but they're not taking care of themselves. And they think like, oh, no one wants me. No one wants that. It's like, dude, you don't want yourself. If you did the things that you had to do for yourself, you wouldn't even have to look for a mate. They would just find you. They would just want you because you're already doing the things that take care of yourself. Like people see like working out as like a hassle or some type of chore. And it's like, it's a part of living this life. It's like, if you want to have a good, healthy, strong life, you should work out. And if you did work out, you would increase your attractiveness to mates, having a job, cleaning yourself, brushing your teeth, like all these things. If you don't do them, you're not going to get to the next responsibility. And then the responsibility of the relationship itself is like, are you doing everything that you're supposed to be doing in that relationship so that when you have a family, right? Like your responsibility is only going to increase once the family starts. And so if you're not maintaining the things that you're supposed to do inside the relationship, it's definitely going to fall apart, or you're going to feel overwhelmed, or you're most likely going to end up being one of these fathers who aren't around when the family starts. And then it only expands from there, right? And so when you see these people who have done amazing things, it's because everything else is all lined up. They're taking care. You can't be Hercules going out and slaying the 13 beasts unless you're working out, unless you're trained, unless everything at home is taken care of, right? And so that's kind of like, I felt like what it was kind of preaching about, the dullness. It's like, if you can't handle the most monotonous, basic tasks, you're not going to be able to handle any task greater than that. And the search of looking for those greater things will never come because you're not even doing the basic 1, 2, 3. And that's kind of what Jordan Peterson, that's like kind of like what his first book was about, right? Is like, you know, make your bed and do like these little basic things, and that cumulatively they all add up.
Yeah, we also saw a piece of this in that episode of Midnight Gospel by Duncan Trussell, where it was basically like the trials of life. And this person had bad karma or had done bad things, and they were perpetuating the same life over and over and over again because they had not learned from their mistakes. And it was like the character with the big circle head.
So he's in jail, kind of?
Yeah, he was like living out like a version of hell, and he just kept perpetuating the same life over and over and over. And at the end of every day, he would be weighed by the hands of God, and to see, are you lighter than a feather, which can be symbolized in a sense like, have you learned? Are you making any progress? And so every day he would, well, in the beginning, I don't even think he understood what was happening. And then over time, he understood, like, oh, and you could see him go through this process of like trying to run away, trying to figure out like tactics of manipulation to escape. And then eventually he realized, oh, it's like, I have to be a good person. And then at the end, I think he triumphed over. But yeah, it was saying that we can perpetuate the same things in our mind. And I feel like that's true for a lot of people, where they think the same thoughts or that something traumatic happened to them and they're just constantly in a state of thinking about that. And I've definitely been there. I was there for multiple years where I just rethought the same bad thoughts. And you just drive yourself mad to eventually where you're like, I can't live like this. Then you like wake up to the idea of there has to be something more.
Yeah, 100%. Back to the dullness also reminds me about like reading books, right? Especially in like today's age, it's like who even reads books anymore? Most people who are reading books or brag about reading books are like listening to Audible books. So it's like very few people actually take the time to read the book. And it's because it is kind of dull, right? At least if you're listening, you can be doing other things. But to that same point though, people will come up with like these questions of life that they think are profound or unsolvable, but they're actually very basic. And these people or certain people will act like these questions are so hard to figure out or they're a huge problem in life. And it's like, well, there's a book on that. Are you reading books? Are you trying, like even listening is a huge step. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I read a bunch of books. I have books. I've read them. I used to read a bunch. I used to read a shit ton. And so I actually do love reading. I haven't read in a while, but I listen to Audible books regularly. But listening to this Gene Key makes me want to get back to just reading basic books. But yeah, sometimes, people come to me with like these questions and act like, oh, they're like their whole life balances on this thing that they can't figure out. And I'm like, well, dude, are you reading? If you just read a couple books, that answer would be very simple. And one of the things that I do like, I can't remember where I heard it. I think it was on After School. It was one of the posts from After School, but it's like, why trouble yourself with these questions that have been answered by many men before you in books? And so it's like, if you're having trouble with something, the answer is out there. You just got to take the time to find it. And I think in that same podcast you just brought up earlier about the guy talking about the house, I think he mentioned that same thing. He was saying that, he was talking about this idea that we're constantly looking for some secret to the universe. Like that in itself can be like a trap where it's like looking for new information, right? So even the concept of finding information can become a trap of itself, because then it's always, I find myself doing that, where it's like I literally have like 5 unread Audible books and I'm like, ooh, but there's this new book out, it's like, ooh, this new book has the answer I need. It's it kind of is what this Gene Key is talking about. Like, there is no answer. You can't like speed it up. But I feel like that's kind of one of the traps of spirituality, right? Is because when you find new information, it's like kind of, or it actually is a high. Like you feel like, oh, I'm smarter now. I'm more enlightened. I'm spiritual because of this thing I read. And then you're constantly looking for those things to read or to hear, to listen, or to see that'll give you that same experience of enlightenment or feeling or being spiritual. But it's a trap, right? It's like the same thing as saying it can be a curse or a blessing, but you can't speed it up. It all happens in its own time. And you're actually hurting yourself by seeking
and attaching yourself to an idea.
Right.
Yeah, we were watching a movie last night, and it's basically about people that have allowed fear to dominate their lives. And it was saying that once you do this, fear can be seen as separate in the beginning, but going deeper into fear and allowing it to dominate, it becomes like a natural state of being at a certain point. And so you're just not even aware that you're in a state of fear, but you are. And to the outside world, you're just seen as like prey or weak. And so they get into this classroom and they have a teacher.
The movie is School for Scoundrels with Billy Bob Thornton and that guy from what is it? I forget the movie. I forget even the quotes, but it's like, oh, gosh. It's that one movie where he always
Napoleon that
Napoleon Dynamite. Yeah, it's the guy from Napoleon Dynamite. I forget what he yells at his llama. That's the quote that's coming to my mind. It's like,
I don't remember.
eat your freaking beans.
But basically, so they get into this classroom, and the first question he asks is, how many of you have a self-help book? And they all raise their hand. He's like, that's what's wrong with you. You think you can help yourself. You need an outside perspective because obviously you helping yourself is not working. But you need me to help you.
You can't help yourselves because yourselves suck.
Yeah. Something like that. And that's so true. It's like you need an outside perspective. And like you said, there's so much literature, there's so much available for us in this day and age to explore and to get an outside perspective, and to neglect that is to not be improving in yourself. And that should be the ultimate goal, is to become the best version of yourself. And so like reading different things, listening to other people, you can gain perspective and gain awareness and eventually unlock things in your mind that you didn't even know were locked.
Right. And I feel like books have a special way of doing that because they're relatable stories, right? So it's kind of different when you hear someone else. Like, we've all experienced where you tell someone something that they need to hear and they're just like like shut off from it. And I think that's like a natural way of coping because the ego sees any type of truth as a threat to itself. So it'll immediately put up some wall, right? I mean, family members are a classic example. It's like you try to tell something to help a family member or a friend and they're like, either see you as the enemy or make up some excuse as to why what you said is invalid. But if they read a book, if they read the right book, it will generally, like, the point of a book is to tell the truth in a format of a story that is relatable to the person. So what happens is, like, you read Harry Potter, you almost identify as Harry Potter or Hermione or whatever. And when they go through their trials and tribulations, they're experiencing like the same thing with it, which is an evolution of consciousness. And it's almost like you yourself is going through that. And so, yeah, books aren't to be like, the word is leaving me, but people just put books as like off to the side, like not important, but they can be a huge key to the evolution of your awareness because you're essentially getting a peek into the mind of a whole different life, a whole different reality that has existed outside of you. I remember one person telling me a long time ago, he was saying that like each time you read a book, you're essentially seeing the world through a whole other person's eyes into a whole different reality. And that, yeah, it's so true. It's like if you have the mind to be able to learn from other people's mistakes, what better way than to put your mind in as many different other people's shoes as possible, right? And you can't in today's age, right, we're so isolated. Well, you can get rid of that isolation by reading books, or listening, or even podcasts. Like, podcasts are super popular. Subscribe. Well, you can essentially definitely gain awareness or level up your awareness by putting yourself in those situations. I feel like when you do, it's seen the ego, I don't know, because it's the way that it interprets the information, it's less likely to feel attacked.
Yeah, for sure. With books and authors, it's like you're saying they've lived an entire lifetime of experience. So to discount it,
Discount. People discount books. That's what
yeah.
that's the word I was looking for.
So to discount their journey is to neglect the information for your own benefit. And it's like you can benefit from learning and hearing their story. And even if you don't take it literally, you can take it symbolically and just apply parts, pieces, whatever to your own personal journey. And you can learn from that. And I think this is true when we see our parents growing up and we see the mistakes that they make. And we're like, oh, well, I'm definitely never going to do that. Like for me, it was smoking. My mom chain smokes. And so it's like, oh, well, I'm definitely never going to smoke. It's like, well, thank you for showing me that. Like, I'm sorry you got caught in the trap of smoking, but I'm grateful that I will never get caught in the trap of smoking.
That was in that show. What was the show you brought up earlier? Oh, with Duncan Trussell.
Oh, Midnight Gospel.
Midnight Gospel, where the dude gets trapped in the jelly that kills him, and he's like, "Oh, just be glad you're not him." But yeah, I feel the same way. Anytime I hear something bad that happens to someone else, it's like I take a little mental note of like, yeah,
I'll do that.
yeah, don't do that. One of my buddies wrecked his motorcycle. We were both training martial arts. We were both fighting, and out of nowhere, he just quit coming to the gym. And I was like, dude, where's this guy at? So one day I went to a party at his house, and I was like, bro, where you been? He was like, dude, I laid down my motorcycle and I messed my hand up. And he's like, I can't do anything now. And he said to this day, his wrist still bothers him. And that had to have been like 15 years ago, something like that, something crazy. And they said his wrist still jacked up. And I remember just thinking, is like, well, don't ever get a motorcycle. It's like, if you just have like a minor wreck and it messes your hand up and I wouldn't be able to fight, I was like, nope, not doing it. And now, that's something I don't worry about. But to your thing about your parents smoking, yeah, my dad used to smoke all the time too. And, yeah, I feel like that was one of the factors of why I didn't get into it. But I remember like, the DARE program telling us about how smoking bad was. And I would like try to hide my dad's cigarettes and stuff. And I remember crying one day and he was like, you're going to die. But yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to bring up? We got to wrap this baby up. One of the comments it talked about was how Earth moves slowly, but still accomplishes everything in the right time. It's like, yeah, in today's age, and in today's world, everything is so fast paced, and we experience it being in Houston. It's like every day, nonstop, go, go, go. Everyone's speeding, everyone's trying to get somewhere. And then when we take a camping trip, out in the country, it's like everything just slows down. Man, you go take a camping trip out in the Smoky Mountains out there in the boonies, man, people. Yeah, it really does feel like time stops. It's like you're moving, and the people are just like, they ain't stressing about nothing. They're just hanging out, chilling. Whereas, like, if you live in the city, man, there's always something. There's a timeline. There's somewhere to be, something to do every single day. You're looking at your calendar. Every day you got an alarm for something. But out in the country, you're just hanging out.
Yeah, here in the city, people are like, oh, what you gonna do on your day off? I'm like, sleep and rest. They're like, what the? You don't do anything? I'm like, after this whole week of work, I don't think I can do anything. Shoot.
And then we gotta do a podcast, and she gets mad at me.
I'm like, this is my rest day.
I'm like, oh, Tori, you get a day to rest? Great, let's do 2 podcasts.
But I must find appreciation for the podcast and what it does for me.
Better.
Yeah, but so with the gift of magnetism, whenever I first listened to this gene key, it was like a couple years ago, and it was the reason why I looked up the Schumann resonance. And the Schumann resonance is the magnetic vibration of the earth, and it vibrates at 7.83 hertz. And this is the natural rhythm, and the more that we can be in line with this state, the more we can, like you said, like Earth moves a lot slower, nature moves slower. It's like the natural rhythm of all being. The normal human state is to move so quickly, but whenever we realize how slow this natural, and it's like, so if you're wondering, like, what's one thing I can work on? It's like, well, just slow down and everything. You don't want to be that person. It's like, breathe through every moment. If you're feeling anxiety, just breathe through it and just try to think of like allowing the fear, the negative states to overtake you in life.
Jiu-jitsu, combat, anything other importance is slow, smooth. From martial arts, I actually got that from combat training in the Marine Corps. We would have like races to see who could. And the guy that was the fastest he didn't move fast. He was just deliberate and sharp. As you, in your mind, you imagine that, I gotta move fast, but you actually just make more mistakes. We would tell ourselves is slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And since doing most of jiu-jitsu, one of the things that you learn is that speed doesn't come from actually moving fast. It just comes from in-depth knowledge of what it is that you're doing. And when you understand the position that you're in and the next position to come, you appear to be fast. Like when I go against other people, they're like, dude, you're so fast. And I'm like, I'm slow. You know?
And it's like compounding movements rather than you think you can just skip steps. It's like
Right.
you skipping steps doesn't lead to the best outcome. And so making the small movements and compounding off of those, just like you're saying with the foundation of our lives, just in general, just to build on the small things.
Absolutely. Master Jiu-Jitsu Tori over there. Yeah, after 15 gene keys, my first gene key is the 19th one.
We're almost there.
Hey. We appreciate y'all for tuning in. Thank y'all so much. Remember, if y'all have any experiences with this or anything y'all want us to cover, please let us know. We always appreciate y'all. Thank you.